North England, we've had a little bit of sunshine, and we've had a little bit of rain as well, and we've had a little bit of general overcast 8/8 cloud. So the forecast is always tremendously accurate from UK Column Live.
Thanks for that, Brian.
It's okay, my pleasure.
We've got a guest in for the second part of the show. Obviously, Brian and I will be doing the news, and joining Brian after the news is Patrick Henningsen, who is now our geopolitical analyst for the column. So he'll be in with Brian for an in-depth talk on the Middle East and Georgia and
Leveson.
And Leveson.
And a bit of nudging.
Okay.
But serious nudging. We'll talk about that.
Okay, right, you do that. I'm going to start. Great article today I saw in the I newspaper. It's also in the Independent. Reporter Andreas Whittam. Have you got the report there, Brian, to put up on the screen?
Yeah, it should come on the screen.
He's saying about corrupt Britain. First of all, he looks at the drug companies, where he makes the observation that British multinational GlaxoSmithKline was recently fined $1.9 billion for bad practices in the US. The company cheerfully marketed its drug Wellbutrin for the treatment conditions of which it had not been approved. Its sales methods compromised spending millions of dollars to persuade doctors to speak at meetings, sometimes at lavish resorts, at which non-authorised use of Wellbutrin was routinely promoted. Glaxo isn't alone. According to the World Health Organization, unethical practices such as bribery, falsification of evidence and mismanagement of conflicts of interest are common throughout the medicine chain. He then moves on to the banks. Some of the banks have been implicated in the practicing of falsifying of key interest rates, as we know. Labour, apparently the Serious Fraud Office has stated it's considering whether it's both appropriate and possible to bring criminal prosecutions. And then obviously we've had the police with Hillsborough. And the corruption, and he puts it down to two reasons why it's happening. One is the triumph of the market fundamentalism in Anglo-Saxon world since the 80s. He then says the second factor is globalisation, which, like deregulation, isn't intrinsically bad. And then he goes on to say then there is the ability of financial trading business to move out of places like London and New York to low tax zones. These are some of the explanations for the march of corruption, but there is little sign that action is being taken by governments to reverse the trend. I don't expect to make my old boast again anytime soon. And this is Andreas Whittam Smith, and it's a double-page spread in the Independent.
Absolutely. Well, this gentleman's picking up on something which I think is becoming more and more clear to people.
I think so.
In UK, that we're seeing corruption at all levels, and that corruption's accelerating. But I think the point that this gentleman is missing is the fact that it is the government which is actually driving the corruption.
And they're allowing it to happen, aren't they?
Well, it's more than allowing it to happen, because actually what we're witnessing is a direct attack on the stability of Britain. And I think it's an incredible coincidence that this article comes up today when we're going to have Patrick here talking to us, because we're going to be looking in depth at what the political agenda is, and corrupting everything that's corruptible seems to be a key part of the cross-party agenda. So I think we're really saying to people, you've got to look much, much deeper than this article. It's good this guy's at least looking in the right direction.
I think it's a real positive that it's actually that the mainstream media are actually staying that, because you won't see. I haven't seen any other articles like that.
That's true, but we've got to look behind the scenes. What is actually causing this? And I think there is now more than enough evidence to say what's causing this corruption is an orchestrated plan to destabilise Britain.
Yeah.
Now that's going to sound pretty outlandish to some people, but we're going to be looking at documentation. Why do you want to destabilise a country? Because one, if it's utterly corrupt, of course the people with the money can pull the strings and direct and control people. And if it's utterly corrupt and there's no real law and order, there's no justice, then of course you can take control of that nation state. So I'm going to say well done for this, well done the Independent, because it's a good article. But
I'm glad he's mentioning the health side, because I've got a couple of health articles coming up.
Just hang on with those, because we just pulled out a couple of things This was part of the quote from the gentleman. I used to boast that Britain was relatively uncorrupt. I think we all thought that. Look at France, I would say, where a high proportion of recent presidents and prime ministers had faced criminal charges after leaving office. Well, perhaps we ought to say, well done, France, because at least their ministers face criminal charges where people like Mr. Blair walk away scot-free. And Italy, where the tentacles of the mafia reach deeply into the civil service, we've now seen with Hillsborough absolutely clearly that the corruption runs straight through the police force.
Yeah.
And he ended that by saying, what explained our supposed immunity? Well, I think that partly we did have an orderly society, but I think it was only skin deep. And really now the lid's starting to come off what true Britain is like. We're finding we're similar to the other countries.
Yeah.
But I got two further clips here. The UK column early in 2011 published an article about Sheffield City Council having 1.8 billion of their public accounts effectively frozen because of hidden fraud concerning the political charity Common Purpose. Now remember that this council has its history with Sir Bob Kerslake, who's now heading up the civil service. But in this particular article, which was exclusive to the UK column, we were the only newspaper, the only publication, the only source of media that highlighted that due to fraud and corruption within Sheffield City Council, the district auditor was forced to hold the accounts for a period, and then eventually the accounts were approved, recognising that serious irregularities with invoices connected to Common Purpose had happened. So this was an example illustrating the corruption where we're dealing ultimately with huge amounts of money, but then when it's supposedly investigated, there's a cover-up to allow the dirty deed to continue. Is this a solitary incident? Well, this is an article out of the Surrey Advertiser, Friday the 18th of September 2009, and the article was about the then Chief Executive of Surrey County Council, Common Purpose, assisting the award of contracts to this political charity Common Purpose. And we're going to come back onto Common Purpose today because it links straight in with what Francis Maud is doing with the Cabinet Office and nudging.
It seems to be in every part of our lives, doesn't it?
Every part of our lives, and it's controlled. And what I think we've got to be able to help viewers and listeners to understand is how it works, what the actual agenda is, and who's looking to benefit by the corruption.
Absolutely.
Drugs. Is it drugs?
It is. Again, in the Independent.
Sorry, go on. We've done a quick mix-up of the slides.
Go on, you
there.
go, Clegg, then.
I beg your pardon, I moved you on a bit quick.
You did.
Okay. Well, it's a very interesting state for Britain when we have our Deputy Prime Minister who is so embarrassed at his complete and utter ineptitude over tuition fees, that he's now making a record in order to sing his apologies. And so this is the article from the Mail, and I recommend that people go and have a read of this article so you get the full flavour of it. But is this really the state of Britain in 2012, where we have a Deputy Prime Minister who has not been elected, and this man is so crass and is making such a comedy of the nation that he's going to sing an apology?
I mean, I just heard him speak, and his apology was pathetic.
Well, if
people make mistakes.
Well, this is a picture of this man, which I think sums him up. So this is still sticking with the Daily Mail. So well done, the Mail, for actually pushing this out. But okay, he's taking money for charity. But what does this actually make Britain look like in the eyes of the world? This man is a buffoon. It's an insult to every person in Britain. It's certainly an insult to the troops serving overseas. And surely this man has got to go. Now, whose decision was it to make a little song and dance about this? Well, was it Was it Clegg? We don't know. But it's very interesting who Clegg then calls upon in order to make comment, because it's none other than our old friend David Laws, and I've got some comment from him, which I'll read for listeners. David Laws, a Clegg ally, appointed Education Minister in the reshuffle, also rallied to Mr Clegg's defence, saying the Lib Dem leader had tried to water the policy down in opposition. Remember, we're talking tuition fees. He took on the party and told them what they didn't want to hear, which was the pledge of abolishing tuition fees overnight was not affordable, that we'd have to do it over 2 parliaments. So this is being said to BBC Radio 4. He, Mr Clegg, now regrets, and I now regret, and Vince Cable now regrets, that we didn't go further to point out how tough this would be, and that we didn't make clear in our manifesto the risk given to the fact the other parties were committed to precisely the opposite policy. Both of them wanted to increase fees, and that's why it would have been very difficult in coalition to deliver this policy. So here we have Clegg, who's made a complete buffoon of himself and the nation, calling in a man who was removed from his post for fiddling expenses. He has to stand down. He's then called back into power as somebody who fiddles his expenses. Many people might consider that to be criminal.
Isn't
but of
he
course,
had the friend with him as well? Took him to...
Well, it was to do with his friend staying in accommodation and what the rent was about.
Yeah.
But this is the man that comes to Mr Clegg's defence. So we have a buffoon in Mr Clegg as Deputy Prime Minister. We're being a bit strong this afternoon. And we have a man who's fiddled his expenses is brought in to defend him. These people are dangerous.
Very.
And if you analyse the state of the country, it can be no coincidence. Any country who's got a Deputy Prime Minister of the calibre of John Prescott or this man, we can expect to be in the state we're in. Sorry to be a bit crunchy on that.
That's all right.
Drugs.
Go on. Drugs. Yeah. Drugs giants are fined 11 billion for criminal wrongdoing. Again, in the Independent, and it links nicely to the last article that I had, global pharmaceutical industry has racked up fines of more than 11 billion in the last 3 years for criminal wrongdoing, including withholding safety data and promoting drugs for use beyond their licence conditions. In total, 26 companies have been fined. And this is according to the New England Journal of Medicine. The largest fine of 3 billion imposed on GlaxoSmithKline in July after admitted 3 counts of criminal behaviour in the US courts, and it was the largest ever. But GlaxoSmithKline aren't alone. 9 other companies have had fines imposing from 420 million for Novartis, 2.3 billion for Pfizer, and that's since 2009, and that totals over 11 billion pounds. The 3 billion fine for GlaxoSmithKline represents just 10.8% of its revenue, while the 1.5 billion imposed on Abbott Laboratories for promoting a drug, I can't pronounce that, Depo-Coty, with inadequate evidence of its effectiveness, amounts to just 12% of their revenue. Governments, universities and charities should step in to ensure funding maintained for research into Alzheimer's disease, following also another load of series of failed drug trials, experts are saying.
Yeah.
So these fines that they're being imposed on them isn't mattering to them at all. It's not doing anything. I mean, just 10% of GlaxoSmithKline is all they were fined.
Well, of course, the fines don't actually hurt any of the executives in the country, in the company. So it doesn't matter how big the fine is, unless it's actually going to mean that they've got to fire people. The individuals responsible must be laughing all the way back to the bank.
And I mean, this is GlaxoSmithKline, and it doesn't even mention the drug that we were talking about earlier in the earlier article, which was Wellbutrin. It doesn't even mention that. I mean, this is going on to Alzheimer's drugs, and just a whole range of drugs, and nothing's being done.
We've actually got a steady flow of these incidents with drugs. Epilim is another one that's come under the spotlight a lot. One of the key things which is allowing these companies to get away with it is, of course, the reports into deaths and the results from the so-called safety experiments are never being made to the public. And in the case of children, and certainly this is the case in UK, we've still not got forensic toxicology taking place where the deaths of children are being properly investigated. So it's no surprise that as we see Labour and Conservative Lib Dem governments pushing through corporatisation, and we're going to come on to that a little bit later, I think, with some information on the NHS. What are these drug companies are out of control.
Totally, and then of course we've got vaccine, flu time coming up, so everyone's going to be lining up down at their clinics for their
next jab.
For the next jabs, and nothing in the mainstream media we will hear about the possible dangers that it could cause. So.
Okay, that's true. So
Mike wants to jump in, I think, there.
You'd like to jump in, Mike?
Well, I was just going to make the point that, of course, GlaxoSmithKline and Pfizer and companies like this are not just drugs companies. They also provide many products that appear on our supermarket shelves, and that really these fines are never going to impact them. It's an individual choice for us whether we buy their products or not, and where I would start is with a boycott of Glaxo products. That's a personal decision, and I think if everybody did the same, perhaps they might rethink their position on these things.
If people are going to the doctors and people aren't so aware of what's going on that their doctors automatically prescribe their drugs, they can't have a choice of what drugs, or can they have a choice of what?
Well, they can say they do or they don't want them.
Right.
But most people, of course, just accept what their physician says at the time because they haven't got the personal knowledge.
Yeah.
What we also know is that there's a bit of shock in a lot of GPs when people do know something about the drugs and suggest what they're prepared to accept and not. There's almost a, you can't tell me my job. And I think part of this is the huge influence of the drug companies over in the training even of GPs and doctors, where everything is based around prescribed medicines and not whole body healing, basically.
Yeah.
There was something else I was going to add, but it's gone out of my head now on that one. Pensions is the key thing,
Michael?
Mike, if you're in the background there.
Right, well, on October the 1st, we see the beginning of the rollout of this new pension scheme called the Workplace Pension Scheme. You may have seen the advertisements on television. If you're in the UK anyway, you'll have seen them with some well-known business people promoting this idea as if it's a workplace pension is something new or something to write home about. And in fact, let's recognise the fact that this new workplace pension scheme is replacing pension schemes which have been decimated by corrupt organisations over the years. So final salary pension schemes have been steadily removed from most of, I don't think there are very many, if any, final salary pension schemes still in existence. And any of them, most of the reason that final salary pension schemes had to be gotten rid of is because private companies were looting the pension schemes in order to pay for debt or whatever. They were stealing the money effectively, and this looting of pension pots wasn't just restricted to private companies, because whereas we've all been paying our national insurance for the last 20 or 30 years, particularly since the Blair government, and since then, those national insurance payments haven't been appearing in the state pension pot. So, as I've mentioned several times before, Britain presently has a £2.5 trillion black hole in the state pension pot, and we also have a £2.5 trillion black hole in the public sector pension pot. So that's £5 trillion which should have been paid into those pension pots by successive governments, which has not been paid in.
Which we can call theft, can we?
I
Can we
would
call
say-
that criminal activity by our own government?
I would say a single penny that is diverted out of the pension pot whenever we've been paying our taxes and national insurance, a single penny that's been diverted away from that purpose to something else is theft of a form.
Well, under public accounting for public money, it should be to the penny. And I think the use of words and describing things as they are, too often the government gets away, it's a mistake, somebody made a mistake with the figures, there was fudging, there was fiddling, but really we're talking criminal activity by people who've been elected into a position of power and trust with the people.
Right, so this is a £5 trillion mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Right. So anyway, in order to deal with this problem, because I've also said in the past that I certainly don't believe that, I'm 43, I don't believe for 1 second that I will be receiving a state pension when I'm of retirement age. I don't believe there'll be any such thing as a state pension by the time I'm of retirement age. And I believe that that's what this workplace pension scheme is about. So basically the way it's going to work is that employees beginning, I think it's being rolled out over a period of a couple of years, but employees, some employees starting on the 1st of October will suddenly find money being taken out of their pay packets automatically. And of course the advertisement tells us that it's okay that this money's being taken out because of course the employer is also contributing as well.
Is it right that anybody earning over £8,000 and who's over 21 it will start affecting? I'm sure that's what I heard on the radio this morning.
Yes, right. Well, the main point is that you can opt out. It is a presumption that you're taking part unless you specifically request not to take part. And I believe that if anybody does opt out of that, the time they get, if they're 50 or less. Or below, they're going to find that by the time they get to 65, that unless they've made some other kind of private pension provision, that they're going to find themselves with no pension from the state. Now, the thing about pensions, private pensions in this country, is that the management fees on them are scandalous, and you save as part of a pension scheme. You save until your date of retirement, and then you get a pot of money with which you can buy your pension, and of course these are linked to the stock market and so on. So, of course, this new workplace pension scheme will also suffer from pension management fees and so on. It's not like the national state pension, and of course in the meantime we'll still be paying our national insurance contributions, and so as I was saying to you earlier, when we did the article on the DVLA several issues ago in the paper, the point we were making is that not 1 penny of the money which is collected by DVLA is used to maintain the roads. Yeah. And now we're in the situation where national insurance it will still be collected, but we find that I would say that this workplace pension scheme is the privatisation of the state pension system. We've got the privatisation of the National Health Service going on. So why are we still having national insurance collected?
Fraud.
Yeah.
Fraud. Right. That is my point. So £5 trillion black hole in state, between the state and the public sector pension pot. It's clearly not going to be refunded, because where are they going to get the money from? They can't borrow the money for it. With the money that has been handed over already by taxpayers has already been spent, so that money is not recoverable. And I believe this is the first step in them scrapping the state pension and replacing it with a privatised state pension system.
And of course, at the same time, job security has been absolutely decimated. So employers are being given more and more of a free hand to sack and let members of the workforce go. So it's a double attack.
Yes, and the other thing about it is, if you watch the advertisement on the television, it's saying initially this is for medium and larger companies, but they intend to roll this out right down to small businesses. Yeah. Now, small businesses are unlikely to be in the position to make the kind of contributions that a large corporation can make. So again, more pressure on small companies. The main employer in the UK now, since they've destroyed our manufacturing base, is small and particularly small business.
Apart from the BBC, probably. Sorry, that was a little bit sarcastic. Yeah.
So, more privatisation through the back door.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, on the subject of fraud and lies, really, we come straight back to it's David Cameron. Now, this is a bit of old news to start off with, because this is the Telegraph originally talking about appeals to voters ahead of the local elections. So we're talking roughly a year ago, something like that. But we just thought it would be interesting for viewers and listeners to actually just have a recap about the sorts of things that the politicians were saying. So if I just call up on screen part of the quote. The Conservative leader said that it was important for people to vote for the council which can best deliver low council tax rates as well as looking after the local area. Ed Miliband said the Labour Party was focused on explaining to voters the difference we can make to people's living standards, cutting their energy bills, making a difference on transport fares. What's interesting about that statement is that Ed Miliband says the Labour Party is focused on explaining to voters the difference we can make. He doesn't actually say that they're going to make any difference at all. He's just going to explain. Am I being unduly cynical? No. I think it's very interesting when you actually look at these people. And then if we go on, meanwhile, Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg insisted that the Liberal Democrats are the only party that has cut or reduced council tax up and down the country. Election experts say Labour should be aiming to win up to 700 council seats, but one of the party's most senior figures in the last government warned that Ed Miliband was still a long way from offering a credible programme of policies. So we can have a look at that today with a bit of hindsight. We've got Cameron, who's sort of pulled and pushed all over the place, but he seems to have money for wars but not actually looking after the country. We've got Clegg singing his apologies to the international political community. And we've got Ed Miliband, who's talking about doing something, maybe.
Maybe, explaining it.
In one way, you can say at least these people are honest in their incompetence.
Yes, this is true.
We're going to be told off, probably. Well, there's a bit more here, because this is now coming more up to date. We've got benefits could be frozen as Osborne tries to save 10 billion from the welfare budget. And call me cynical again, but when I saw this headline and I saw the figure 10 billion, I thought to myself, isn't that remarkable? It's more or less the 9.2 billion pounds that we found in order to cover the Olympics. And so what better example of what the Tory party is really about than we're going to cut 10 billion from welfare, but we can find 9 billion at the drop of a hat to allow Olympics to take place. This is not accidental. These people are actually carrying out an agenda. We know that the shortage of money is, of course, pure fraud, because it's being created out of nothing by the international banks, and the international banks own people like David Cameron and George Osborne.
Why doesn't anyone else pick this stuff up? Nobody else can see the Olympics, how much that is.
I agree and I disagree. If you go into the average pub where there aren't TVs and very loud music and you can talk to people, what you actually find is that they will tell you what's happening. They will tell you that they see what's going on around them and they think it's ridiculous, you know. So I think people are waking up, but hopefully that's what UK Column Live is doing.
Sorry.
Is there a comment coming, is it?
Ozzy Osbourne could do a better job. And then Sparky's gone, my cat could do a better job. So,
well, people do know. I mean, we're having a bit more of a jovial programme today, but we do know that when you talk to ordinary people out there and you pin them down on these subjects, they know that what the government is doing at best lacks common sense, but they know that something's badly wrong.
In the chat room of TNS, actually, somebody's put, has Miliband ever had a proper job? Do we know? We know that
none of them have had a proper job, is the answer to that.
No.
So it's quite incredible. This takes us into a serious subject. This is to do with children being taken by the state. And this is something which, of course, the UK column's been very outspoken on. We've given talks on the subject of child stealing by the state. But here we've got the situation where Slovakia in Slovakia, scores of Slovak mothers are protesting in front of the British embassy because Slovakian children are being taken away by British social services. You'll see it in the background. I've got a picture of the demonstrators, if Mike can just put that on the rear screen, or full screen there.
Was there not an article this week in the Telegraph on that?
Well, there has been some reporting in the mainstream press, and of course, Christopher Booker from the Telegraph has done a sterling job in trying to promote and expose what's happening with the child stealing and social services. But they're very interesting that we're now getting cases where foreign governments are beginning to pay attention when people are saying that the British government and social services have stolen my children. And these stories are not just one or two, there's a pattern to them. And as an interesting aside, we know in Norway, there's a case where Norwegian social services have taken 2 children away from an Indian family, which produced the same result that the Indian government challenged what was happening. And their comment was that Norwegian social services seem to have more power than the Norwegian government. Now, we're also getting that type of comment now in Britain, and of course we know that social services are physically telling the police what they can and cannot do. So we've got the police linked to social services, and we've got social services linked through to psychiatric assessments. And my feeling is what we are watching is effectively the start of a gulag. We can take your children, you can't do anything about it, you dare to protest or cause trouble, and you're put in a psychiatric unit. So for Slovakia to actually flag this up, I think it's quite incredible. If Patrick's happy that we just overrun slightly, we can finish the remainder of the news. Patrick's sitting in the corner for viewers. He's keeping an eye on us at the moment. But this was the one I wanted to make sure we talked about, which is it's come out of Newsnet Scotland. So I find this very, very interesting. Here is a Scottish view on what's actually happening with the NHS in England. And unlike the present lies that we're being told at the moment by the mainstream media, it's quite clear that the government intention is to carve up the NHS by full privatisation. And the reports here from Newsnet Scotland, and the original reports come from an organisation called Catalyst Corporate Finance. It's outlining major opportunities for private healthcare providers. Now, this is the interesting quote, who are ready to cash in on the coalition government's desire to dismantle the health service in England, where privatisation will reach into GP practices, sexual health clinics, and even entire hospitals. So, out of Newsnet Scotland, thank you very much. We're finally getting the truth as to what's going on in Britain. And of course, this is a conspiracy directly between David Cameron's outfit and Clegg. And the agenda is to privatise the NHS. So hopefully, if we've got any doctors or nurses watching, start to ask questions about what's really going to happen in the hospitals. Health, we've got to talk about this.
Yeah, this is on, James found this and did a little blog on it last night on Liberty Tactics site. Following the release of a peer-reviewed piece of research linking the consumption of Monsanto's Roundup contaminating GM crops, the French government has called for a health agency investigation seeking to analyse the research and potentially ask European authorities to protect human health and abandon the use of GM crops. France's agriculture minister and others are now sounding the alarm. The study was the first to ever examine the true effects of lifelong GMO consumption in rats and was dubbed the most thorough research ever published into health effects of GM food crops and the herbicide Roundup on rats. finding an onset of mass tumours and damage to the kidneys and liver. The study has serious implications as to what large-scale GMO consumption is doing to human beings.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the GMO coming, well, the GM crops are just everywhere at the moment. I think there's a little piece local to me where they've got an organic farm, and then just around the corner there's a little GMO testing plots.
Yeah.
So all it takes is a gust of wind and off they go down to the organic farm.
Yeah.
It's,
So this was another policy that was brought in by stealth, effectively,
yeah,
wasn't
absolutely, absolutely.
We've got one
And
last one here.
Yeah, sticking with the GMO crops, Natural News, which is a great source for natural health issues and, well, all health issues really. Mike Adams has written a piece that the Australian Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation has developed a novel variety of GM foods, particularly wheat, that contains altered protein and enzyme suppressing mechanisms that some scientists are now saying could cause serious problems for the human liver. Since the technology directly inhibits an enzyme in wheat that is very closely linked to glycogen, a polysaccharide produced in the liver, consuming wheat or barley that contains these GM alterations will likely lead to liver failure and eventually death. Yeah. And they're saying that if this technology silences the same sort of genes in human beings as it's silenced in the wheat, then children who are born with this enzyme not working tend to die by the age of 5. A professor called Judy Carman has said adults with this problem just get more and more sick and more tired until they get very, very ill. And apparently this the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation have said GM wheat has not been approved for commercial use as of yet, which is not being used in the food chain supply at this time.
Yeah, so that's the drip introduction, which we
they're
usually
doing these
get.
tests, and well, it's kids the age of end up at 5 if their parents have been eating it could die getting into
so
the food
we're
chain.
back on the line of stay healthy food, and whether that includes GM, we're very doubtful.
Very, very doubtful. And I'd just like to say to everyone, if you're liking what we're doing here at the column, please subscribe to us, www.ukcolumn.org, so the guys can continue making their mini documentaries and
printing
papers,
travel, phone calls, paper.
Yeah.
And a few more things. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, excellent.
So, where are we going now?
Well, I think we've got a short interlude, an introduction to Patrick Henningsen, Mike.
Yeah, well, Patrick's got his latest show on Paradigm Shift TV tonight. Do you want to say something about it before I play? Right, well, I'm going to play the trailer for that now while we get ourselves set up for the second half of the show.
Okay, thank you.
Israel is certainly the biggest danger to world peace.
Gilad Atzmon, artist, writer, cultural commentator, born in Israel, now living in Britain. Gilad's first book became an overnight bestseller, but has drawn heavy fire from the Jewish lobby and has seen attempts to silence him for his criticism of Israeli policies on race, war, and Palestine. Tonight, we meet him to hear his story.
I'm Patrick Henningsen, and this is the 21st Century Wire.
Well, good afternoon and welcome back into the UK Column Live studio. And I've got Patrick Henningsen with me. Hello, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Brian.
So you had an exciting rail trip down last night, but you made it. That's the important thing. Well, we didn't have any particular plan, actually, to talk about things, but the news, the emerging news has really done it for us. So we've chosen two main subjects, which is really Leveson, but it's been prompted by what our old friend Harriet Harman has been doing. She's been having a chat to the BBC. So we thought it would be of good value to have a look at what's happening really through to Leveson and where that might lead controls over the press. And after that, we were going to move on to the subject of nudging, which of course is the soft sell for applied behavioural psychology. And we were intrigued to see today that Francis Maud, the Minister of Transparency, smokescreen minister, is now boasting that the technology from the government's applied behavioural psychology unit is going to be sold abroad, and the Australians have unbelievably been silly enough to buy it from us. But
that's from the same overseas sales department that sold it, the wonders of privatization and PPI to countries like South Africa and other developing world countries. The British knowledge.
Small technical issue. I think you're on. We'll try that. Just say something?
Yes.
Okay, we're there.
Yeah, so again, that's the exporting British know-how in things like how to decimate the real economy and also how to shut down society, as it were.
A question for you. It's Britain that sort of proposes or advertises that this sort of things, we take privatisation or PFI initiatives, and you quite rightly pointed out that it's being taken on by other countries. Why do you think they do it? Or what's the process by which what's happening here migrates through to these other countries? Surely, if Australia was there as a competent nation state applying common sense, they would look at the shambles unfolding in Britain and say, well, we don't want this.
I think this structure, this problem we have in this country and in America and some of the sort of leading economies where you have opportunists, career politicians, and awarding no-bid contracts to their school friends and so forth. This sort of corruption exists in Australia, it exists in Africa, it exists in South America, it exists in Asia. So we're exporting our criminal know-how in the public sphere to other countries because also Australians have a sycophantic relationship politically with Britain being in the Commonwealth, and they look to Britain to lead them into the 21st century with new know-how. So it's very impressive when a contingent arrives in Sydney to do a talk on PPI or something like that, and they're waiting there to rub shoulders.
This is a really good point, isn't it? Because if you talk to Australians who are here, and there's a lot of Australians obviously in UK, young people in particular, they're very proud of Australia and independence, and they may well say, well, no, we don't really want the British monarch anymore. But what you're saying is absolutely correct, that in the background there's this cooperation going on. And we were intrigued to find, actually, it was looking into the roots of the Scottish Parliament and the way that's set up now, that there was reference to the Commonwealth and the need to build the Commonwealth. Now, most people, I would expect, would see that with the rise of the European Union, that the role of the Commonwealth's been dropping away. But actually, on the contrary, it seems to be becoming stronger.
Absolutely. It's the neo-colonial agenda, which is post-colonial. And as Britain realized in the 40s, when it had to let go of its Indian asset, it didn't really let go of it at all. What it did is it redivided that country and rejigged its relationships with its former colonies into a neo-colonial one that's really an economic union for British corporations and British-owned transnational corporations at the forefront of that economic union. But it's packaged nicely in the Commonwealth, and we have the Commonwealth Games and the Commonwealth Institute in Kensington High Street and all these artifacts of the Commonwealth. But in fact, it's not a Commonwealth. It's upward channeling of wealth to the richest families and richest corporations that are based in this country. And some in Canada as well.
Yeah, but if you're part of that club, it doesn't really matter what nation you come from, because the most important thing is you're part of the club.
Yeah. So very interesting to look at how that's changed and how it's continued, grown stronger, as you said. Some of these links that are really old colonial economic links. Yeah. So and a lot of that began with the corporate raiders, the Tiny Rollins, and some of these characters in the 90s who went to recolonize and reorganize African countries for their mining interests and other existing corporations. They're retaking it over and rejigging the whole relationship it had with
and of course
the UK.
we've got the drive for regionalisation of Africa already going on. People think that Africa at the moment is nation states and
ditto for Europe.
Yeah.
Ditto for Europe.
Of course.
This is a trend that I think is going global. So we talk about a one world order. It's going to be a one world order developed by region, and not by nation state.
And that's also true in the United States, where underneath the states that regionalisation policy has gone at quite a pace.
Yeah, it has, with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Mexico, United States, Canada, just as an example.
Yeah.
And also some of the Pacific agreements and trade structures. And above this, you have the WTO,
the World Trade Organization.
The World Trade Organization and GATT, which are helping to manage this transition.
Right.
And of course, when some of these regions are in place and these economic blocks are secure, then you'll see the WTO fade away, possibly be replaced by a new form of world government, so to speak.
Yes.
So these are some things to look forward to in the 21st century if you support that kind of globalization.
Which we don't. So
And
we're
if
going
you
to be
don't,
we're going to be looking at how we stop this.
And it's very, it's fundamentally, it's very easy to stop globalization, because if you put your foot down at home, then you're going to make a huge crimp in the globalization plan, master plan.
In that if one nation state starts a protest, it's like one person in a group of 100.
Absolutely.
It started, and
if one city in Britain, one county, one council decides they want to do it a better way by using their local assets, then that's going to make a major problem on the national level. And if you have a problem on the national level, you've got a problem on the international level as well. So that's the battle plan, as it were.
Right. Now, I'm being indicated by technical. Mike, you'd like to come in?
No, I'd just like to ask a question, because obviously Totnes Pound has existed for years, but recently, within the last few days, Bristol has launched its pound, so they're starting to do things at a local level economically. How does that fit in with what you're just discussing?
Well, certainly you can introduce a parallel currency, and that's happening all over this country. It's also happening in countries like Greece, and that's a direct reaction to the failure of the paper coming out of Brussels and coming out of the ECB. So the euro, we're talking about complete failure in its paper. This decimated countries like Greece, Italy, and Spain. So local communities are well within their right, and actually there's a lot of great examples of that right now today in the UK. I've seen it on many fronts, and not just by a parallel pound, but by also putting value on other items as commodities that can work as money, as it were.
Yeah, but we've got to be very careful on this one, because we've also got Agenda 21 and transition towns, and there's a lot of pressure at the moment for...
The Brixton pound, I live in South London, Brixton, they introduced the Brixton pound a couple of years ago, but that was in conjunction with the transition towns around. So again, it's a nice kind of liberal entree into a local currency, but you have to look at who's behind.
Yeah, this is the bad guys helping people to actually pull themselves into little communities where nobody's going to be too much trouble, as opposed to what we're promoting, which is greenback pounds, which is actually a national currency issued by the government, which has got proper buying power and is issued as credit, as opposed to debt.
And holds its value.
And holds its value,
yeah. Because you have to remember, above all these arguments about money, the thing that is robbing everybody of their savings, of their future, of their children's future, and of their livelihood, and their quality of life is inflation. And of course, the money that we have right now, the inflation is controlled. They can turn the spigot on and off. They can inflate markets, and they can pop them.
And they are doing that. Yeah.
I would direct everybody on that statement. I would direct everybody to the zerohedge.com website, and if you do a search, certainly within the last 2 weeks, they showed a graph which showed quite clearly historic inflation going back several hundred years, and showed the effect of the move to the Federal Reserve System on global inflation and demonstrate with a very stark representation in a graphical form how since the 1913 creation of the Federal Reserve Bank and the move to that system, financial system globally, inflation is just utterly out of control compared to historically. So.
Yeah, and that's the tax that nobody talks about. That's the hidden tax. That's the thing that no matter what you do, no matter how many jobs David Cameron says he can create, or Obama or Romney, which they can't anyway, no matter how that works, again, the inflation is the thing that is literally stealing money and allowing money to be transferred from the working and lower classes, decimating the middle class as well by transferring wealth up. And that's simply all inflation is. It's not a law of the universe. It's not a law, one of God's 10 Commandments, that thou shalt be inflation upon thee. It doesn't. It's not so, and I think people need to get that out of their heads. That that's some sort of maxim in our modern world.
It's getting people really to just think a little bit more and start to ask questions about what the government consistently tells us. I've always been intrigued by the fact that when we have a budget in this country, there's massive media hype, BBC leading it, of course, and it's budget day.
It's that little red box.
We have the little red box, that's all the ritual, obviously, and then there is the announcement of what the main things are, and we're told duty on petrol is going up and on drink and what's going to happen with mortgages. But they never actually talk about what the state of the nation's accounts are. It's always overlain with this window dressing on things which, yes, are important to people in their daily lives, how much VAT they're going to pay on children's clothes or whatever it's going to be. But really, if we're to understand what's being done, we've got to dig into what is the fraud that's really being committed with the finances of the country as a whole.
Absolutely. You know, I just this morning in the office when I came, Mike Robinson showed me a Freedom of Information request, which Malcolm had got about Plymouth and the collection of council taxes. Now, if there's no independent auditing going on in your area, you know, we have to at some point take responsibility for this and to do the auditing ourselves.
Well, no, just interject there.
Sure.
Don't lose your point. But people will say, well, you know, we have the audit office that actually audits local councils. But when you get into it, what you actually find is in many councils, the auditor is embedded in the council. They actually work alongside the council team. And so if you start to really put pressure on as to what's been happening with the council, Sheffield is a perfect example where the evidence was all there of the of fraudulent invoices. This was in relation to common purpose. Bongs is the correct term. And yet, what did the auditor do? Well, the auditor didn't want to deal with the problem because they're embedded, actually, it's too close, too cosy.
I mean, my council, Lambeth Council, my house is £170 per month for council tax.
Right.
Okay. Now there's 250,000 people living in this borough, I believe, or something like this. There's easily enough money in the pot to put every single child to university for free in our borough.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question has to be asked at some point, why are you volunteering? Why are we having to pay this money to get nothing of substantial value in return? If you think of other subscriptions and payments in your life, where you have to pay around £200 a month, you usually get something quite substantial in return for that. That's helping you personally or your family.
But that's actually where we don't see the figures presented to us about nationally where the pot of money is going. You are paying this much in national insurance, this is where it's spent. We never see those figures, do we? What was the point about Plymouth? Because I
it was
cut in there.
the cost of collecting council tax in Plymouth suddenly shot up to quite a substantial figure. Mike Robinson, can you just draw that picture for us?
Yeah, well, so the FOI request resulted in a spreadsheet which gave the total cost of collection of council tax from 2000 to the present. So from the year 2000, I'm just speaking from memory here, but from the year 2000, 2001, Plymouth City Council spent £4,000 on collecting outstanding council tax. This was the cost of collecting non-payment. And that rose to, until 2010, 2011, it was I think about £1 million we're spending, and then suddenly in 2012 they're spending £15 million collecting unpaid council tax. Now we know from our friend Danny Bamping that the first, in any council tax year, the first hearing which is held will be in June. I believe it's June or July. I think it's June. So in other words, new council tax year, new bills go out, people get into arrears, and it takes them April, May, 3 months to get the summonses out from the council printer out to the people and for them to appear in court. And we know that the day that Danny was in court, there were, 4,500 summonses issued for that first hearing. Now, let's assume that over the, I mean, I don't know this, so this is just sheer guesswork, but let's make an assumption that over the other 9 months until the end of that council tax year, there's another 4,500. That's still 8,000 or 9,000 summonses, and let's say that there's that each council tax bill is about £1,000 a year, which is what it is in Plymouth. Then we're talking about £8 or £9 million outstanding council tax, and yet the council has spent £15 million trying to recover that, and we wonder what the reason for that is. Now, there is a line item now that I'm not going to mention today, but there's a very interesting line item in that Freedom of Information request, which is for a forthcoming programme. Perhaps it depends what it turns out to be, but we're still investigating this, and there'll be more information on that in due course.
Yeah. Well, it's always cloudy, isn't it? The moment we start actually looking at public money, what people are paying, we suddenly end up in this very murky, nobody's too sure what's going on. And of course for me this is very pertinent, because I started out by following where money was going in this city, very large pots of it, 49 million, and the first thing I discovered is that when government grants New Deal money, for example, came into Plymouth, instead of it going into one location and then obviously as it's spent a full set of accounts can be produced, what happens is the money is split up into different funding pots within the council, and then you can do as much work on it as you like. What you can't actually see is where this money that came in, 25 million, whatever it is, where it actually goes. It's broken down and frittered away. And the other thing which Martin Brighton, who's the guy who's done the tremendous work exposing the massive fraud up in Sheffield, he's pointed out that when you start to ask the questions, what's happened to the money, and you've got the evidence to show that something's not right, they turn around and try and brand you vexatious. So there's a policy to shut up people that ask the wrong questions about where public money's going.
Yeah, it definitely hemorrhaging massively, and has been for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And a lot of the money that we're paying in our council taxes and so forth, a lot of them are going towards ironclad council employee pensions and things like that, and government pensions, contracts, dodgy engineering projects that aren't too effectual or take 5 times longer to complete than they should, and it's endless. I mean, there's an endless amount of things that if you had a really good look in there. Endless,
but there seems to be an organisation to it. It's not just, you can't explain it by incompetence, because the incompetence seems to have a template running.
It's systematic.
Well, of course, if you're going to do dirty deeds, it's best to do them in the dark. And if you're going to do dirty deeds as a government, then certainly you want to be in control of the media. And probably this gives us an introduction into our first topic, which is at the moment what's planned for the mainstream press and media. In fact, I'll correct that, because it certainly seems to us that it's not just planned for mainstream press and media. We are now getting strong indications that what the government really wants to do is to control mainstream press and media and alternative media. And of course, I think that's partly due to the strength of alternative media.
Absolutely.
So what we've picked up on, I'm keeping a careful eye on the background because I'm wondering if there's technical issues, but I think we're okay. Well, we picked up on the BBC Radio 4, the media show, which we should be able to call up on screen for you. There we are. And this was an episode where Harriet Harman is talking on Leveson. Talking also about Kate. Presumably that's Kate Middleton and the unfortunate photos. And the new Director General plans for the BBC. I can't remember the gentleman's name. Can you remember his name? But I know he's claiming he's taking a huge salary cut and he's going to work in an open plan office. But he's still earning, I think, about £430,000 a year, which is roughly 10 times more than a well-paid executive in a normal...
I think what it means is he won't be able to afford that third home
the third
in
home.
Ibiza.
Right.
Yeah, that's probably what he's talking about.
Yeah, it's tough. Well, can we have a look at Harriet? Here she is. And it's just been very interesting to hear what this lady's actually been saying. Now, we can't actually play you the clip live because that's BBC, but what we can do is actually just work through a transcript of some interesting items. So, viewers and listeners, if you'll bear with us, I'll just gently read through this and we get an idea of what's actually being discussed in the background. But if you want a clue, look into Harriet Harman's eyes, because I don't see a lot of human empathy there. Whatever's behind those eyes, I'm being serious here, I don't see kindness. There's something going on.
To come through 10 years of New Labour and to survive the Tony Blair's Night of the Long Knives, which seemed to happen every 6 months in the Blair government, she's a champion through that system.
Yeah.
So that you would have to be quite thick-skinned and not have too much interest in human issues to survive.
A bit of a ruthless machine.
You would have to be a ruthless machine to survive through the Blair years. So
okay, well let's see if we can work through what this lady's been talking about. I'll do this as quickly as I can. So she was asked, do you have concerns with respect to Leveson? I think that what Lord Leveson has done is enabled people for the first time, not just celebrities but ordinary people as well, to feel that they can come forward and say this is how the press have breached their own code of conduct and this is how it's hurt me. Now, I think the press needs to defend its freedom, absolutely, but they need to reflect on the fact that they must obey their own code of conduct. I've got 5 of these, so if we go through, and I think we can remember the gist of them. So it's lanced a boil, if you like, in a way. Well, I think it's paved the way for a new settlement, and that's what I hope will happen. What I don't want to see when Leveson reports is an argument between Labour and the Tories on this, where we have a political dogfight about it, nor do I want to see a dogfight between the politicians and the press. I think we need a settlement, and therefore we all need to stay calm and work together. What's your simple view on the notion of statutory regulation? Well, my simple view is that what we cannot have is business as usual and the status quo, or a dressed up version. We need a system of dealing with press complaints which is independent of the press and of politics and which can enforce itself against everybody, all the newspapers, not just those who've decided to opt in. The only way of achieving that is having some kind of statutory empowerment of an independent organisation. Statutory independent organisation. You don't go with the principle that statutory regulation is inimical to a free press. Well, I don't think there should be regulation of the press. I will be totally against any kind of editorial content pre-publication scrutiny or any invasion into the governance of the press. I've lost track. Have we got one more? I think this is the last one. Doesn't one thing lead to another? not if we have cross-party agreement that we have a minimalist intervention and that we all respect the fact that constitutionally people don't want to see politicians controlling journalists. So we have a very important path to tread together. When Leveson reports, we want to work with David Cameron, the Tories, with the Lib Dems, with the newspapers, on the basis of Leveson to get a good and enduring fair settlement. What do you make of that lot?
Well, firstly, the Kate Middleton photos and the Prince Harry photos that are used as a major talking point with regards to this type of Leveson issue,
Yeah.
they are classed as celebrities. And you see topless photos of celebrities every day in the paper, and not a word from anybody and no questions in Parliament.
Yeah.
So again, it's a non-issue. The fact that they've made it an issue, obviously, in the very tightly controlled Royal Press Office, I believe that they have control over whether these people are allowed to get access to get such photos. I mean, no one in my family sunbathed, no women sunbathe topless.
Yeah.
But then again, the royal family are different, and they
Yes,
have
of
different
course.
ethics and values and stuff. But at the end of the day, I thought Harriet Harman's comments are very telling, because what she's really saying here about cross-party agreement, about statutory
Yeah.
organizations, when she says both parties need to agree and move forward, what she's really saying is you can take the S out of parties. She's saying the party must move forward together,
Yeah.
and we must take care of this together, and not through legal systems or not through public consensus or referendum or any democratic constitutional process, but through a runaround, which is an administrative statutory process. And that's bad news if you want to preserve what is left of any free press in this country.
Yeah.
And Britain should be leading the world in terms of freedom of the press,
Yeah.
because it has led the world in so many times throughout history as far as democracy and government and legal leading and press and so forth. It should continue to do that. I see this as a move backwards.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, how she's bringing, as you say, bringing all the parties together. So, we want to work with the Tories, we want to work with the Lib Dems. So, the political parties are grouping up, single party state.
And at no point did she mention the people in this. If
No.
you know. So clearly, Harriet Harman is demonstrating. I'll let you get back to your point, but
No, that's fine.
Harriet's demonstrating that people like her, elected officials, do not work for the people. They are there in the interest of the state.
Yeah.
And in state, you can put the party in brackets. And this is the sort of language you would see coming out of, communist Eastern Bloc countries.
Yeah.
And from the Soviet Union, almost Bolshevik in its character, which I find quite interesting, because that's really what we're looking at here. We are living in a fascist corporate state. That's not really an
Well,
exaggeration.
communitarianism, if we
Yeah.
throw a few terms around here, if people, you've used communism, now we're collectivism, fascism, it comes together under one nice title, which is communitarianism. So have a look at that on the internet or research it if you're interested in the definition of that term. But it's essentially talking about a one-party system, which is a police state. We can say this version's got a bit of socialism in it, but it's highly corporatist.
And with hidden steering bodies like completely done under the radar, somehow funded with public money, with international non-British financial institutions and charities involved in backing it as well. So what exactly is really going on here? There is definitely a long game here. This is not an exaggeration. This is really happening. There is a long game.
Well,
and Common Purpose plays a key role in seeing this long-term agenda come to fruition.
Yeah, we got a little bit of the UK column got a little bit of a clue about this in the early days, because before the last election, people that we were talking to close to the main parties, but the interesting one in this one is a source that was close to the Tory party, and we were casually given a heads up. Now, we can say this is hearsay. I'm going to say this was a good source. that had been accurate previously. And we were led to believe that there was a discussion on the sorts of things that the UK column was printing, and that David Cameron is alleged to have said to his team that when we are elected, we will deal with people like this. And I remember the day that I received the information, and I thought, my goodness, that's incredibly interesting. And here we have Harriet Harman, and of course she's not just talking about the official mainstream press, mainstream newspapers and media. She's saying, and other people. And I get the sneaking impression that what we're starting to see is Leveson's claw is going to start to come out over anybody who actually wants to publish, be it in a newspaper form or electronically. And if I can just ask that we get up the Leveson Inquiry one, just to refresh our minds what's been going on in the background. This was the front page of a UK column. I think it's pretty explicit because basically we labelled the Leveson Inquiry with common purpose exposed. There is a common purpose in the Leveson Inquiry in its broadest sense, and of course we've also got it in a more tight sense in that we've got Sir David Bell, chair of the Common Purpose Trustees, who's third from left in the picture. And if we just focus on him, it's extraordinary what we find. He's chairman of Common Purpose, so that produces links with Shami Chakrabarti, who's standing there on his right. Second from left in the photograph, and so we've got Common Purpose in there, but in the background we've also got we've got connections through to the Media Standards Trust, and we highlighted this in our article, which was sent off to a number of the mainstream papers. We're going to protect those that responded. But basically in this article we did get a good response from some of the mainstream papers who were very interested in what we called up. Can we just pop Leveson Inquiry back on the screen? Thanks, Mike. What we were highlighting was that we've got the Media Standards Trust, which is intimately linked with Common Purpose. It's intimately linked with vast banking interests and the sorts of funds and trusts that are able to bring big money to bear on their campaigns or salaries. So the Media Standards Trust starts to call for control of the press. It says we need a debate over the Press Complaints Commission, and the Media Standards Trust is then indicating in its own documentation who is the best organisation to take control, the Media Standards Trust. So you had an incredible connection through, which is Common Purpose, through the Media Standards Trust, through David Bell, straight into the Leveson Inquiry. This is the second page where, of course, we had to highlight Julia Middleton, who's the Chief Executive of Common Purpose. And this is the lady that had sent emails to Francis Maud, which were signed Love Julia, where she was touting for business in training the top 200 civil servants. And she was doing that whilst Sir David Bell was present in the meetings. So most people would call that insider dealing. Francis Maud at the moment, who says he's supporting transparency, doesn't want to issue the full minutes and the contract details. So behind Leveson, we've got this incredible spider's network of these organisations, and I'll just continue it through to this little organisation, which is Full Fact. Now, they popped up out of the woodwork because we published an article about the British Constitution Group chairman Roger Hayes, who was put in prison recently for withholding council tax, but the point was he went through a court with no jury, press, or indeed no notification of the hearing, of one of the hearings. And when we reported that article, up popped Full Fact, and they basically said that our article was not truthful, it was conspiracy theory and a few other things. But when we went to have a look at who Full Fact were, we discovered that not only does some of their team connected with the Media Standards Trust, but they claim they're a sort of not-for-profit company. Viewers might not be able to see this, but it says at the bottom, Full Fact is a not-for-profit company registered in England and Wales. Our core funding comes from 3 independent charitable trusts, the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, the Nuffield Foundation and the Esme Fairbairn Foundation. And
from individual supporters' donations.
Yeah. Well, the key thing is that when you go into these funders, you also find that, an amazing coincidence, they are funding the Media Standards Trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Rowntree Trust has its fingers in those particular pies, I do know.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting.
Yeah. So we've got money in the background which is clearly influencing. But this one gets better because one of the readers of the UK column was very observant and discovered an advert that was in the back of Private Eye magazine where it said that basically now the Leveson Inquiry was moving forward, Full Fact was in a position to recruit new staff. And we're not talking about one staff member, we're talking about several, in order to follow the campaign through. So my question is, whose campaign?
Well, there's certainly a very strong relationship between the Leveson Inquiry and full organization like Full Fact, made to seem like they're not connected at all, and they are. And this is being orchestrated clearly. It seems to me as being orchestrated as a very organized sort of thrust, if you will, and that thrust is coming into, it's going to invade things like freedom of speech, freedom to publish, freedom of expression. The WikiLeaks, if you want to go to international level, the WikiLeaks thing is not about whistleblowing. Julian Assange never blew a whistle in his life except when he went to Carnival. Okay, he's a publisher. And that incident is being used to limit and possibly censure publishers, and to make it very difficult for them to get out of the long arm of the law in terms of the United States in that case. But certainly here, looks like it's attacking publishers, maybe independent publishers who are not in the sort of corporate media realm. And that is actually the majority of economic growth in this country. We're talking about small businesses earlier, a lot of small media businesses. So, and certainly to silence them, an organization like Common Purpose has been constructed to direct and influence public opinion on any number of issues. Their members are secretly embedded in every single organization, civil and Quango and NGO in this country. It's almost like a Masonic organization. It's very similar characteristic.
In the way the network, and you're a member and you don't declare it.
And you don't declare it, exactly. So you could go into court and you have Common Purpose judge sitting behind the desk, and you have a Common Purpose barrister, or you go into a situation like you go into a hearing. And the panel is all Common Purpose.
Let's talk Leveson, because we know that basically Media Standards Trust people have been called in front of the Leveson panel. So we've got Sir David Bell sitting on that panel, vested interest with Common Purpose and the connections to the Media Standards Trust, and then more or less your own people come and sit in front of you to give a version about what's right or wrong with the press. Now, the other little thing that the UK column article identified was that the Media Standards Trust set up the Hacked Off campaign. I don't know whether you've heard of that, but that was a campaign that was pushed out, great angst and unhappiness with what was actually going on in the press, and they called forward several people, Hugh Grant, Mosley, and a few other people who've had bad experiences with the press, not because they've been giving money to children and the amount was wrong, but what they've been doing in their supposedly private lives. So those were the people that Media Standards Trust and the Hacked Off campaign brought forward. So when Harriet Harman is saying, well, of course, we're talking about celebrities, and some ordinary... No, they're not. They're not talking about ordinary people.
No.
They're talking about privileged elite.
Because the state is increasingly invading the public individual's private life on so many levels, electronically, data mining, data collection, statistics, smart meters in your house, you name it. The state is totally invading privacy, but yet they want to change the whole playing field of media, free speech, publishing, to protect the rights of a handful of very highly paid so-called celebrities.
Celebrities, elitist people.
So it doesn't make any sense from beginning to end, this drive to someone with common sense.
Yeah.
But there's an agenda there. It's a social engineering program.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Mike.
I think it's one of the most dangerous aspects to this is the attempt to join celebrity with politics, in the sense that somebody who enters public life as a politician or a civil servant, or somebody who's taken an oath of office, is almost being given an equivalent status to somebody who's a celebrity. Now, a celebrity who chooses to become an actor or an actress or somebody on television of some form, some kind of art, whatever it is, they have no role within public life other than to entertain. And in that case, I see that there's a case for them being permitted to maintain a certain level of privacy in their private lives. On the other hand, people who have taken an oath of office have made an oath, a promise, to do certain things in the public interest. And in that case, as we've discussed before, where there's the possibility of their activities being controlled through blackmail or through other mechanisms, then I believe when you choose to stand, you make a choice as a career choice to stand in public life, then you're giving away a right to a private life. You're giving that away. That is the compromise you make for choosing that lifestyle, and the reason that you give that away is because of the dangers of blackmail and other things. So in that case, clearly there's a difference between peering through a keyhole into somebody's bedroom. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, to give the classic example, if we talk about Rory Stewart, for example.
Just put him in context. Rory
Stewart is an MP in Cumbria. He went to his first Bilderberg Group meeting year before last. He maintains his right to stay silent about Bilderberg on the basis that he went there in his private capacity. Now, this is not a reasonable position to take, in my opinion, because, okay, he may say that he went there in his private capacity, and unlike Ed Balls, for example, he may have paid for it himself. I don't know. But the issue is that visit to Bilderberg has a bearing on his public capacity as a member of Parliament, and is nothing to do. He wasn't there going on a blind date. It wasn't a night out with a girlfriend. This was an event which has a bearing on his public life, and therefore he has no right, in my opinion, to hide behind the privacy laws in order to protect himself from answering questions on these types of issues. And so I think it's one of the most dangerous things, aside from the potential for direct attack on the alternative media, which is the only form of media which is doing any real unbridled investigative journalism at the moment. The real danger is this sort of lumping of politicians and public servants in with celebrities like they're the same thing. They're not, and that's something that we've got to be careful of, I think.
I think that's a new trend. We can talk about the royal family in the same story, because 30 years ago, the royal family had almost a bit more decorum, almost a bit of humbleness in their public.
Well, they did things, but it was done behind closed doors.
It was done behind closed doors, and ditto with politicians. Now, with the advent of the Tony Blair phenomenon, and getting all the musicians and all the Class A drug users in Downing Street for parties and having champagne and whatnot passed around and hobnobbing with the rock stars. Now the new generation of the royal family doing the same. So both politician and royal family elevated to the class of super celebrity.
Yeah.
And there's a new category of people which was unveiled at the Olympics. It's called the VVIP. So they've now officially put a new strata on top of VIP, which is VVIP.
Right.
And these are the VVIPs. And even in these celebrity reality shows, it's not uncommon now you have politicians or government employees
mixed in with them.
Mixed in with the Big Brother or the various celebrity apprentices and so forth. So clearly that line of demarcation that was there as a good, to make these people good role models for society, that's gone now. Now they folded them into the same.
Well, actually, the role models being presented are absolutely the wrong role models.
Absolutely.
We are presenting people who are criminal, deviant, perverted as an okay role model. Or am I being cynical again?
No.
I've been cynical several times this.
No, that's been happening for decades. So, but again, this idea of two sets of rules. One set of rules for this class, and it's the celebrity class we're talking about, and another set of rules for this class. In America now, the TSA has a different protocol for Beyonce and Kanye West and some of these pop stars. They don't have to go through security checks, nor do certain politicians.
Right.
Now, Ron Paul still goes through the security check, even though he's very famous in America.
Right.
But some of them don't elect to get special treatment. But it's there now.
Right.
So again, a two-tier system. So we see that same sort of thing rolling out here in Britain.
Well, I think I've got a slide a little later on. We're watching the time because obviously you're going to be talking about the Middle East as well. Just a last point maybe from me, and I'll give you the final word, is that of course if you follow the Media Standards Trust, then you've got to go through to the Hacked Off campaign. And the interesting thing about the Hacked Off campaign was that the site was actually registered before, if my memory serves me correct, I think it was 2 weeks before the phone hacking had actually started. It was almost as if the Media Standards Trust Hacked Off team knew something was going to break.
What a coincidence.
Do you think that it was created, maybe?
It's just a massive coincidence, Brian, and I think you're
I'm
being paranoid. No,
Okay.
it was definitely, this is the sort of stealth campaigning and stealth body creations that used to influence and push ideas forward and shove them into the public's lap. That's exactly what's happening here with organizations. I can see right through fullfact.org because they have their tab on their website. There's a Leveson Inquiry, large tab.
So they're not biased, are they?
At the end of the list. So it's almost like this fullfact.org, supposedly independent group funded by the Roundtree Trust, is joined at the hip with the Leveson Inquiry.
Yeah.
And as we know, most of these public inquiries in this country, they're whitewash inquiries half the time. The person who's appointed to head the inquiry is appointed to get a certain outcome. Yeah. And that's not unusual, and I'm not saying anything new to any of our viewers there.
Well, I think Leveson is there to get a predetermined outcome, and I'm sorry, and I think it's to actually get full control of the media.
Yeah.
What else can we say? They're going to clamp down, if we allow them, they're going to clamp down on mainstream media and alternative media. Mike, you've got a final word there?
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate, if they've got nothing to hide, they've got nothing to fear. This is what we're told with regard to CCTV and other invasions of our privacy and limitations on our liberties. And I just throw that right back at them. If they've got nothing to hide, they've got nothing to fear. There's no need for extra draconian legislation to deal with privacy issues. In the case of we'll remind ourselves again that in the case of the phone hacking scandal and the issues that brought about Leveson, these were criminal offences that took place to be dealt with by the police and the criminal justice system. there is no need for additional statutory regulation of the media.
Right, well, can we just give Private Eye a mention, because Mr. Hislop from Private Eye said exactly that in front of the Leveson Inquiry. He spelt it out very, very clearly, that the law had been broken, the law was in place, the law had been broken, so why was there need for more legislation? But of course the Levesons just steamrolled through that. If we lose the free press, then we're going to end up with the criminal government we have doing as it likes in the dark, behind closed doors. And ultimately, dictatorships always lead, unfortunately, to the demise of investigative journalists. They disappear. Chechnya is a very good example of disappearing journalists, which we'll maybe talk a little bit about.
Sure.
Joe Kills.
Well, I'll just cap that off by saying, on the aggregate, the alternative media over the last 10 years, on the aggregate, has eclipsed already the mainstream media.
Yeah.
You look at the viewer numbers of some of these so-called mainstream media outlets, their advertising revenues dropping. It's a law of diminishing returns for the establishment media, because all the eyeballs are going to, on the aggregate, to these various alternative media outlets.
Yeah.
So we are collectively, UK Column is playing its part. Certainly, Infowars.com and some of these websites that I've worked with in the past, they're playing a massive part.
Yeah.
All together are absolutely burying the mainstream media. Okay,
Yeah.
so the numbers are there. So people are tuning in to mainstream media. So obviously this is a thing of great worry if you've invested your political capital into corporate mainstream media influencing and using that. It used to be the one sort of pipeline to create a consensus reality.
Yeah.
They want to get that band of reality back into a narrow sort of pipeline again, because right now it's
broadened out.
It's
Yeah.
really broadened out, so we're able to do things and to help people in terms of what UK Column is doing, helping individual communities all over the country to air issues and to highlight cases. This will not happen if they're allowed to have their wicked way with what is the real free press.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
All right, well, we're going to move on to the subject of nudging. We've taken this out of BBC News, because the BBC, of course, are heavily involved in the nudging programme, so maybe it's appropriate. Let me just have a look at my master list here, otherwise I'll be losing track. Nudging is a name that's been given to applied behavioural psychology. The government's trying to tell us that it's very nice, innocuous stuff, because basically if we write a form in a different way, people are going to pay their taxes because they feel obliged, they feel a bit guilty, so they're going to pay.
Like calling citizens customers.
Yeah.
There's lots of these little things.
Little nudges, and it's all nice, and actually it's so efficient that it's now going to be sold through to the Australians. So I'll just read a little bit of this. An innovative government unit set up by one of David Cameron's closest aides is to start exporting knowledge to Australia. The Nudge Unit advises government on ways to encourage people to change behaviour without using compulsion. It claims to have helped increase court fine payments and late tax payments. So this is sold as something which is absolutely innocent. And if I just call up the second slide here. Now I know viewers, you're not really going to be able to see this in any detail simply because of the amount of information and the resolution. You can get this article and diagram from us, but basically with a considerable amount of research, we put together the links which showed what was really going on behind the scenes. We're not just talking about a little group of people deciding how we're going to word tax forms. We're actually dealing with extremely sophisticated neuropsychologists and neuroscientists and psychologists who are looking at how our behaviour can be changed. The government document you need to get hold of is called Mindscape. And if you just put Mindscape into Google, you can get a copy of that document. And what the document says is that basically this type of applied psychology means that people will have their behaviour changed, but they won't realise it's being changed, or they won't realise it has actually been changed. So that's one issue. These people are not looking to just work on tax forms. They're actually looking to change our whole behaviour, and we're not going to know it's happening. And of course, the techniques can give rise to mental illness if you apply this stuff to somebody who's got a propensity to depression or whatever.
This is heavy duty social engineering. This is heavy stuff.
Yeah. And well, in that slide is a photograph of a man called Oliver Willier, if I pronounce that correctly. And this man was working in Sarkozy's private office, and he's the French expert on this form of applied behavioural psychology. And he has been meeting with the cabinet leadership team. This is where we come back on this focus with common purpose. So this is not nudging. This is a massive program of applied psychology, and we know that in DEFRA alone, over a period, I think it was 3 years, but some 34 million was spent on this program. So it's been trialled well before Cameron, and the link in the diagram, you can go back when the uploaded version is available, install pause the program, but the links go directly, of course, across into the education program and big society. So it's pretty deep stuff.
Well, what you have here is you have the top tier, the ruling civil government, whatever you want to call it, tier, wanting to change the behavior of the public.
Yeah.
And why would you need to do that? Why would you need to employ such sophisticated social engineering, applied psychology, to get people to do things that they are not comfortable with doing?
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm not talking about getting up and going to work or brushing your teeth. We're talking about electing to do things that really they feel they shouldn't be doing,
Yeah.
like giving their money away for nothing in return, or to accept less and have to pay more,
Yeah.
and so forth. So what really should be happening is the ruling class needs to have their behavior changed. You know,
Yeah,
it's going the wrong direction.
Yeah, but the key is for us to start. Now, I've got quite a few slides here, and I've got an eye on the time for you. So what I'm going to do is just go through these quite quickly to give people a flavour. Hopefully get people interested to research themselves what we're talking about. So we'll go through these. I think that we'll have given a good little snapshot, and then we can have a look at your main topics there. Tony Blair here. We've got a little rat on the screen, which I decided to leave. He's talking about the rise of the new class. This is a quote from Mr. Blair. He has a vision of a new Britain. Central to this vision is the creation of a new class, a new elite, placed in positions of authority, who will propagate the new spirit of the age and spread the principles of the third way across Britain. Mm-hmm. So Tony Blair, in 2000, through the Centre for Policy Studies, is telling us that he's creating an elite.
Well, that's what they have in France. They have a political university. You have to go to that particular school. You have to come up through the ranks of that school system in order to be in public office.
Yeah.
So they have a political bureaucratic elite in France, and that's accepted as normal now. And so what Tony's really suggesting is that we have that sort of same system here, where people are born to rule and are brought up through the system.
So people born to rule, which brings us into the political charity Common Purpose, Future Leaders. And we're just giving a little snapshot here of Common Purpose is everywhere, and I've chosen Children's Services. We've got the Local Government Improvement and Development Organisation, previously IDEA, commissioned Common Purpose to conduct 4 collab courses for Children's Services in Wigan. And if anybody's very visually astute and says that the font is wrong in the word collab on the 3rd line, in fact there is a change of font in the original thing, and I think that itself is a little bit of nudging. We're seeing a little bit of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, being used. Why do we need to have Children's Services people trained as future leaders? This is where it really gets out of hand, reported in this case by the UK column, but what the mainstream press didn't report when they pointed out the chief executive of Suffolk County Council had spent £400,000 on behavioural change for her staff, was the intimate links with common purpose. And this is where we've got this insidious network linking people together. I think that the financial officer of Miss Hill committed suicide and hanged himself. So whether that was as a result of somebody messing around with his mind, I don't know. This is taken from Hansard, and basically this is showing that what's happening has not come out of the woodwork recently. It's been going on for years. So in 1989, Common Purpose has established programs in 15 cities. 5 more are due to become operational by 1992. This is well embedded. Who's funding Common Purpose? Major international banks, Deutsche Bank, one of them. And if we look a bit deeper, more of it, changing communities, transforming society. I'm not saying this particular lady is doing anything wrong. We're looking at what is actually happening here. We're getting into Merseyside. We're changing the community. Who says we need this? Where are they taking us to? They never say that bit.
Transforming society.
Transforming society. And this one was particularly interesting. This is a Treasury document talking about a whole area approach to public services, where they set up 13 pilots across the country. I'll just read the tiny script, read the small print, it's always a good idea. The total place approach has been developed over 12 months through the work of 63 local authorities, 34 primary care trusts, 12 fire authorities, 13 police authorities, and a wide range of third sector organisations. Putting the citizen at the heart of the service design, it says in the main text, has helped open the door for local partnerships, innovative ideas and solutions. Now what fascinates me is that if we look out the window at Britain, we see the country clearly being taken apart, and at the same time we've got this massive increase in these organisations. So
yeah, you have to look at the correlation there.
Yeah.
So it's not good news, really. So I don't think whatever they've set out to do, and I think it's important to point out here that organizations like Common Purpose, although you can look at this from one perspective, which are that they're undermining, in many cases, the public interest. There's another reason why they exist, Brian, which is it's like a corporate consulting body that goes into all different civil areas and educational areas in public life in order to ferret out and to derail and to look at any potential leaders and to get them out. And that's as much of a function of Common Purpose than it is to influence public opinion and policy. They need to neutralize any future. What's the one thing in any organization that can change policy? It's leadership.
yeah.
And I think they're probably doing a very good job of homogenizing an ideology throughout their membership.
Right.
And put them in influential positions to get rid of future leaders. You see this all across, not just this country, but all across the world. Anytime you have a covert organization, their main job is to neutralize and to get rid of potential leaders.
Right.
Identify
and
them
this
young.
absolutely takes us into the Soviet system. Beg your pardon, I'll just come back if we pop this. Here's Antonio Gramsci. So we've got a Marxist revolution in the state. But how did he say you do it? Steady, incremental subversion, patient gradualism. And at the bottom I've put a quote from Common Purpose where they say that they're going to develop leaders who can lead beyond their direct area of authority. That's pretty nice if you're a policeman. And they will deliver the accumulation of many small things from which most change emerges. So it's a creeping policy. And of course, it takes you straight into David Cameron's big lie, because big society is based on Saul Alinsky, not my words, David Cameron's words, and we're back into this this subversive policy. Here's Alinsky himself. He was a destroyer of capitalism, so he's not interested in stability. And key is, the man said he didn't believe there was a right or wrong in politics, only what you needed to do.
And as community organizers, that's your key job title there.
Absolutely, community organisers, and what do these people get up to? Well, Common Purpose, as a simple charity, got up to putting together blacklists of people who dared to research what they were up to. So this is their document where they were reporting on people like me.
I'm sure you got a file. You definitely got a file.
I think we probably have yeah.
Yeah.
And the last one we'll do is where does it lead? And I'll bring you part of it here. This is part of an article in the, sorry, where are we in full camera? From the UK column, talking about broken society to big society. But we're actually showing how basically things have been pulled in a network where we've almost got an East German style reporting program. You've got the leaders reporting. It's coming back in. Nasty stuff.
This is very interesting, and also we'll talk about maybe another day the unemployment problem in this country, but you can see all the signs leading to this collapse of society, as it were. And tell me that story again about this woman from Romania. I thought it was very interesting.
we had a UK column meeting last night. It was the monthly meeting. A lot of new faces. It's getting really interesting. More and more people turning up. So we were well over 40 people, which is very good for an ordinary midweek night. A gentleman and his partner. The lady was from Romania, and she said that a scientist, well qualified lady. She said that she came into this country and she quickly realised that our society had disintegrated. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, poor as Romania is, people are still relating, the family structure is there, the little communities are working. And she said, in Britain, I realised that there was some mad culture at work, to which I say, well done, what an observant lady. But of course, this breakdown hasn't come out of nowhere. It's actually been engineered.
Over quite a few decades.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've got about 12 minutes to go, 12 or 30 minutes to go. For working on Devon time, it's probably 13 minutes. And we were going to have a little bit of a chat through what's happening in the eastern states.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing we're going to talk about, and I just wanted to have this conversation because I think it's very hot on a lot of people's news boards right now, which is the Mohammed film.
Right.
That came out, this supposed film that set off a wave of fire and angst across the Middle East and Central Asia.
And the Muslim communities.
And the Muslim communities.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at this just quickly. I need to break this down to get it straight for any UK column viewers. What actually happened here? This was a film that was produced on a very high budget, top sound and lighting stages, 40 plus actors that we could count.
Right.
Okay, so we're looking already in the first sort of 90 seconds of the film, half a million in budget terms from film production people that I had watch it, because they can kind of work out the budget of the film by watching it. So multi-million-dollar production, definitely done in the United States with the amount of American actors. And so this film was already on the internet in June, okay? And all of a sudden, this highlights of this film has been released on September 11th, but not just released, really pushed from a PR perspective.
So that costs money as well.
That costs money. Corporations do this every day. They can take a product and they can put it on everyone's Facebook page with viral marketing within days, okay? So there's a massive, expensive, sophisticated PR push to marry this film with existing protests. Now, the sacking of the U.S. Embassy in Libya was something that was announced before. And you had a simultaneous event in Egypt. What are the odds of the same event happening in two different cities, thousands of miles apart? Okay. So there was what's happened here, just quickly, is really important to notice. The radicalization of any real grassroots movements in countries like Egypt and Libya have happened because of Western intervention. Okay, the MI5 and the CIA have historic links with the Muslim Brotherhood, with Al Qaeda. So what they've done is they've managed to get these radical Muslims to infiltrate the genuine Gaddafi-style Africa First anti-imperialist, anti-NATO grassroots movements. They picked off all their leaders, got rid of them, replaced them with jihadi Muslim radicals that really have ties in many cases to the West in terms of their influence, possibly their funding. So from a Western Pentagon or a Vauxhall Bridge perspective, if there's anything that's going to pop off, if any steam valves are going to burst, they want to control which ones burst and when they burst and how much. So that's why you would take control of a radical group. So that's the psychology and behind the geopolitics of it. And that's just what happened in Libya this week.
Yeah.
But
So in simple terms, you are saying that this film was deliberately created, was funded, and marketed
by a third party.
By a third party with the aim of inciting.
But this film laid latent until this moment. And so what the mainstream media did, the corporate media, the CNNs, the MSNBCs, the BBCs, they took this film and they grafted it to existing protests on the anniversary of September 11th in Libya and Egypt. And once it got grafted, then people looked at it as if the film triggered off all these riots and protests.
Right.
When it was really anti-imperial, anti-NATO angst that was really fueling it, being directed by possibly Western agents at the top.
Right.
But so the mainstream media is complicit in any deaths, any damage, any strife that occurred by associating this film with existing riots and protests. They married the two through public relations and mainstream media.
Right.
That's is what happened. So that's the phenomenon of the Muhammad film. So it's not always what it appears to be, is what I'm saying, and I'm not surprised by what happened. Very over-the-top production as well, very kitsch.
Right.
I think it's brought the same people who brought us Adam Gadon, the American Al Qaeda leader, probably brought us this film as well. Yeah, I'm pretty convinced of that. But it set off green on blue killing in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
All these Afghani soldiers that the U.S. have trained, turning on the Americans again. And what this does is it just creates the conflict zone to maintain it, and all the industries that are profitable in a conflict environment will continue to do so.
This is the 1984 story of the world living in perpetual state of war.
Sure, because
So
it's not the natural state of people. You know, I've traveled all over the world and traveled in the Middle East. 99% of the people are in a state of peace. They're happy.
Yeah.
They're content. But there is that 1% minority that's creating conflict in some of these areas. And also the media propagates the idea that the Middle East is at war with itself and with us, and that's simply not the case when you go to visit these countries. The violence is normally isolated in specific pockets and is being directed and funded and influenced by normally people outside those countries.
Right.
So where's the real trend there, and why is it happening?
So again, we're saying to people, to viewers, look deeper.
Look deeper.
Much deeper in these things.
Absolutely, and don't go with the hype of, especially a YouTube film. People don't just go making YouTube films in order to incite global hatred. They just don't. Just like racists.
Ordinary people, you mean?
Ordinary people.
Yeah.
Racists, even the most committed racists, don't go down to the supermarket with a Nazi armband around them.
Yeah.
They just don't do it. Normally, when you see this public show, there's normally something else behind it because it's not normal. But the whole point is to create conflict, and within that conflict you're allowed to divide and rule. So the West versus East, Muslim versus Christian, clash of civilizations, that whole narrative is now been propagated further as a result of this incident. So that's the talking points in America.
Yeah.
We can't live with these people, they're nuts.
Yeah.
They'll set the world on fire and impose Sharia law if they're allowed to exist, not even in their own countries. So, and that brings us to Georgia. Okay.
It should come up on screen. We have.
Now
Georgia.
This is an interesting story. In 2008, August 8th, 2008 to be precise, Georgia and South Ossetia had this conflict, which was spun by the media as South Assetia attacked Georgia, when in fact it was now proven it was the other way around. Georgia attacked South Ossetia. Now, what is Georgia? Georgia is run by Mikhail Saakashvili, who is basically a Wall Street lawyer from New York, who is one of George Soros's guys was parachuted into Georgia. And so Georgia's been very, very friendly in this alliance between the U.S., Israel, and Georgia, that triangular alliance. Right. Okay, and why is that? Because if you look at Georgia, look at the position of Georgia, not only is it key in terms of its geography, in terms of its military value, and also in terms, there are natural resource assets at play. There are potential pipeline projects.
I just wonder whether we get that in the back screen, Mike, I think. Is it possible? Yeah.
But this is the deal with Georgia. Dick Cheney, it came out after the Bush administration that Dick Cheney was really really pushing for Georgia to play a more aggressive role in challenging Russia. Yeah. Okay, and the reason was the U.S. had sent 500 top officers as trainers to run, and some of the top lieutenants in the Georgian army, military, are of Israeli dual nationality. Right. So you have to look at this situation, and really what it is Georgia's just become a good customer for U.S. arms and Israeli arms. And that was proven. Look, the Israeli shell casings and so forth found on the South Ossetian side. So really what they're using Georgia just to provoke and antagonize Russia through South Ossetia to create, again, that arc of conflict. And that ferrets out into the nuclear arms race with Russia on one side and the United States on the other. So it just keeps this idea in this arc of conflict. And Georgia plays a really key role in that. Whether there's going to be an actual war that kicks off here, I don't know. I'm not sure, although that was pretty close in 2008.
Are you seeing any of this depth of analysis in any of the mainstream British papers? Or
no. What the mainstream news will do, aside from Russia Today, which obviously has an interest in this because being Russia, what they do is they wait for something to happen and then they just react to it. And all their reactions, talking points, are streamlined across all mainstream media. Yeah. Okay. So what they're not telling you, for instance, is that Georgia and the Ukraine wanted to have joint membership entry into NATO. Right. And NATO had to reject this entry because it was a bridge too far as the Russia was concerned. So obviously they couldn't, but they're trying, okay? And in response, Russia has signed a joint military agreement with Kyrgyzstan. Yeah. And the West have been, and Britain and America have been, absolutely trying to bribe Kyrgyzstan in so many different ways to host military bases, and have had some success in the greater Afghan theater. But Russia now has signed the deal.
Yeah, I'll just say, for me, this is fascinating because I spent my military time at the height of the Cold War, and obviously NATO was the alliance which was supposedly protecting the free world, and the Warsaw Pact on Eastern Europe, put very crudely, with the bad guys. Mm-hmm. We then have the Berlin Wall coming down. Which I remember for me was a bit of an event like 9/11, because I looked at it and I said something's wrong, because in the background none of the intelligence material that I was privy to or other analysts were looking at said there was the slightest change in the political regime. So we had the BBC absolutely gushing, that was it was all over. All of the top communist officials had suddenly decided to become good guys. It was ridiculous. And so we've got here now where all of a sudden we can see NATO is something rather different. It's beginning to gobble up states. It's being used as a means of bringing countries' military under the control of one overarching structure. Mm-hmm.
One that's not fully accountable to any particular national interest other than the ones that dominate NATO, and NATO is currently dominated by the US and Britain.
Well, something I'd like explained to me is the fact that David Cameron can absolutely slaughter British forces in the true sense of the word and cut them, and he is reducing our armed forces. He then stands on a national platform and says what we will do. Is he controlling the American armed forces, or is his controllers, or are his controllers controlling?
I don't know if David Cameron's controlling anything particularly,
Yeah.
but certainly he has a role to play in a public relations role.
Yeah.
But I don't think he has any effect on policy at
Okay.
all.
We've got a minute to go, I think. If you sort of summed up what you think is going to happen in this area, or
Well, I think Georgia is, to sum it up, Georgia is a banker-friendly state right now.
right,
It's got banks and Wall Street loans and all sorts of things that have been used to, quote, rebuild Georgia. And with Saakashvili at the helm, who's an absolute, I don't know, apparently reports are that he's quite a brutal dictator.
Right.
Just, they had their prison system revamped. They got a 60 million euro loan from the European Council to modernize all their prisons.
so they're under the banker's control.
Sure,
Yeah.
and then to modernize their prisons, and it was all very good public relations, and now it's just come out that there's this huge rape and abuse program in those same prisons,
Yeah.
and Saakashvili is running for cover. So again, it's a banker-friendly state. They would like to colonize the other countries around the area.
Okay.
They're having problems with that at the moment, like Syria and so forth. But Georgia is definitely full blast in.
Patrick, we've got to end there because the clock's racing away. Thank you very much for joining
Thanks.
us and talking us through. Thank you for joining UK Column Live. Next week we will not be broadcasting Priority on the UK Column paper. We will be there tomorrow. We will see you the week after next. Thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye.